I'll start. My name is Rod, and I like to party.
So you mean whiskey?
What?
You're saying it weird.
Saying what weird?
All of it.
Where do you get off?
Hey there, church planners. You made it to another week, another Wednesday edition of the Church Plan Podcast. This is your host, Robert Frazier, and my co-host,
Matt
Chicado. I didn't know if he was ready for it, so I went in.
I flow with it. So
Have you been listening to the Monday episodes lately with Peyton and Pete?
I have gone back and started to listen through to them because I was at church with you the other day and I admitted that I hadn't really listened to a bunch of them, so I felt some conviction. I was like, I should probably.
You should probably get to know those guys.
I
Well,
know.
I guess they've moved their smack talk to the end of the episode,
Oh,
which I don't like that. I
yeah, I
gotta
know.
warm myself
You gotta,
up. I gotta get into it.
exactly, and you gotta keep people. I guess if someone's here and they're like, I want content, they're like, oh, but I gotta listen to these two yahoos
If
talk
you
about
want
the
content,
NBA for.
just scrub forward 15 minutes, 10, 15 minutes, and then
Yeah.
you'll find the good stuff.
That's
Today
right.
we're gonna be talking about evangelism and reaching lost people. So if you want to jump in, make sure to move forward probably 10 minutes. And Matt and I, it's NBA playoff time, man.
Right in the heat of it, getting ready for the conference finals.
I
I'm
know.
ready,
Conference finals is when the NBA season really starts.
My favorite time of year.
Yeah,
Just
this
good
is
games
so
of
great.
basketball every night for the next. This is like the first off night, but then it's 14 days straight. I mean,
Yeah.
but assuming both series go 7, which I doubt one of them will.
No, I think Boston is likely to close out in 5 because they just have to give up one game in 5.
A gentleman's sweep.
A gentleman's sweep. I like that. I mean, they like toast the other team by 40 points, and then the next night they're like, we thought we'd let you have one, and then they
Yeah.
roll through 3 more.
Yep. No, I mean they look pretty unstoppable in the East, and I would have
Mhm.
thought Boston was. I mean, I would have thought that Denver was probably their biggest hurdle. So, but
Yeah,
I'll tell you,
I would
man,
have thought
I
that
watched
too.
that game last. I watched that game last night from beginning to end, and the Denver Minnesota game, and it was unbelievable the comeback that Minnesota put on.
I got to be honest. Every time I watch Jokic, I watch him and I go, "That's the NBA MVP." Like
He he does
I
not
don't know,
look
man.
like your stereotypical, your prototypical NBA MVP. So,
Like you see the Greek freak and you're like, okay, that makes
oh
sense. Like
yeah,
that.
he's
Yeah,
big, lanky, huge, muscular.
yeah, if he didn't win every rebound he ever took, that'd surprise me more than him not being the MVP, you know?
Yeah.
But Jokic, I mean, what is it about Eastern European white dudes that make them look chubby in it's something about their upper body strength or something because they all look kind of soft in the shoulders. You know what I mean?
Well, I think that Jokic actually is kind of. I don't think he's what
You
you
don't
would
think it looks like
call in like basketball
shape?
shape. Now he's conditioned because here's he played 47 minutes last night
Yeah.
in
Oh
a
yeah. He
closeout game
obviously,
7.
yeah. And
He
he's a
is a
big guy, so
yeah,
it's a lot of
he's carrying
energy.
around a lot, but
Yeah, yeah.
there's nothing about him that's like, oh yeah, like that's that's a man. He looks like he races horses in the off season, which is exactly what he
Like
does.
he's an owner of a horse racing
Yeah, yeah,
company.
that's
Yeah,
what I
yeah.
mean. Yeah,
Yeah, but
no,
even like,
the poor horse that would ever have him
oh
on it would
yeah,
be.
that he is not well built to be a jockey, to be clear. Um, Luca is kind of the same way though. That guy's got like chubby shoulders.
Yeah, yeah.
And I don't know, like obviously they're great basketball players.
Dirk Nowitzki he looked like he was in shape. He looked like a basketball
Yeah,
player.
but he was just like lanky and lean, you know.
Yeah,
He was like Chet Holmgren, like just kind of looked.
that guy looks like he's gonna break in half.
I know he looks like a skeleton. It's kind
Yeah,
of like I'm worried about him, honestly. He
more like
needs
a,
to put
I would
on,
say like a scarecrow.
but if he puts on 50 pounds, he's gonna look like Shaq did in college when he was the greatest athlete of all time.
I will say this as somebody who doesn't ever need to put on 50 pounds and consistently could stand to lose 50
Is
pounds.
trying to lose 50 pounds normally.
I
Yeah,
can't
yeah.
fathom the idea of putting on 50 pounds of muscle on top of this of who I am right now. So the idea, I mean,
Well,
I get it. I guess if you
but
told me like,
he's
hey,
what, 14 inches taller than you?
yeah,
I
probably.
mean, that's a lot of like length that could use some
Some muscle.
girth, you
Yeah.
know?
Yeah. Giannis's first year was like a tall, lanky, skinny kid, and now he's,
Yeah, yeah.
he's
He's
formed
filled
out
out.
some.
Yeah.
But
Okay.
but
Well, so I would have thought, yeah, I thought Denver was the prohibitive favorite coming out of the West, except they just it's like Jokic doesn't want to be there. Like he just seems bored all the time playing basketball. Like he wants a longer off season, so he just gave up. That's what it looked like last night to me. He just doesn't care.
I mean, that's the general consensus I get from watching him engage in basketball. But he played hard last. I mean, they played really well. It
Yeah,
was
yeah.
being up by 20 in the
Well,
third quarter.
and
Like,
Minnesota is a very good basketball team. Better
oh,
than their record indicates for sure.
I think I think Anthony Edwards is one of the futures of the NBA, and it's exciting to watch. Like having not had a dog in the fight for this round, he was the reason. Like I watched more Timberwolves games than any
Hmm.
other of the series, just because it was like I want to see what this guy does. And he had his ups and his downs, but he was like when he gets going, it's just he's unstoppable. It's crazy.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
Yeah,
Well, it's
I
gonna
will
be
say I
fun.
didn't watch a single minute of the. I don't even know who the Celtics beat. Who did they beat for this last round?
See, it was such a short round, and there weren't any meaningful games.
Was it the Heat
Um,
this time?
no,
Was
the
that the
Heat was
first
the
round?
first round, right?
I literally, I
Here,
could tell
let
you
me. I
everything
got the
about the other.
playoffs. I got the playoff brackets right here. They played the Cavaliers. That's it. Yeah, that
Oh
makes
yeah,
sense.
that's
Yeah,
right.
yeah.
Without
Without Donovan Mitchell. Yeah, yeah.
Donovan Mitchell, and they had a
Well,
couple other
and
people get
without
hurt.
Porzingis too. Like their big man.
Oh yeah, well,
Yeah.
and I guess he's not supposed to play in the first two games, so
Yeah,
that's
I
not great.
mean, I think that's like honestly him having not meaningful basketball to get healthy in feels good.
Yeah,
Like he had time to
yeah.
heal up.
I uh, I feel bad for the Knicks. I mean, I know you probably don't like or if ever feel bad for any New York sports,
No,
but
no,
like
no.
this was a really good team they had constructed, and then just everybody got hurt. Like that just
Yeah.
sucks.
I
So
mean, then
it would have
that's a
been
part of the
it would have
game.
been good to see a good second or Eastern Conference Finals, and I think a full strength Knicks would have given a better run for the money for Boston than the Pacers
Yeah.
as they are constructed now.
Well, I
So
think the Pacers are my favorite underdogs left. Like they definitely have outplayed their ability through just sheer force of will, man. Like they have just
yeah,
pushed through, and they obviously
well,
beat
and
the
they can.
Bucks. Yeah,
Yeah, the thing about the Pacers is when they go into like their go mode where they're just running and gunning and they're hitting their shots. I mean, if they get two of those games, it can all of a sudden be a series, especially if it's one of the first two games. Then
yeah.
they get home and they can settle in. But
Yeah.
I
The
I
problem
just
is the
it takes a
Celtics
lot.
defense.
Yeah,
The
takes a
Celtics
lot
defense
to
is so
get all
shut
that
down.
firing.
Yeah, yeah.
Yep.
I'm thinking like if I have to say, I still think that they'll take the Celtics to 6 games. Like it's a conference final. Being anybody in 5 or less is tough
Yeah.
in a
Yeah.
7 game series. And
Yeah.
then who do you think between the Mavs and the Timberwolves? You think Timberwolves are gonna put it all together for 7 games?
I think they will. I think it'll probably go 6 or 7, but I mean, just based on watching them, I think it's so crazy. Kyrie Irving boggles my mind because this is the first year he's been like not an issue off the court,
Well,
and he
it's
could.
the first year he didn't look like an anti-Semite because everybody was
That's
anti-Semitic.
right. That's right. But he underperformed so much for so much of the last round, but when they like really needed him to show up, he did.
He jumped in,
And it's
yeah.
just it blows my mind. And so I think like if Luca and Kyrie have like these killer fourth quarters where they can just shut things down, it wouldn't surprise me if they win in 5 or 6. But
I mean,
it's a big if because
yeah, I think they have the weakest like top to bottom roster, like out of the four.
yeah,
Dallas just doesn't have strength. Dallas and the Pacers too, but I think Dallas has two great players, and then everybody else is pretty.
yeah.
You know.
It's the same. I mean, it's like if you look at Minnesota, having Rudy Gobert, Karl Anthony Towns, and Anthony Edwards, like those three are
Well,
great players.
and Rudy Gobert playing the best basketball of his life at times. Like he's
Yeah,
been
but
looking so strong.
and the good news is like Jokic was his kryptonite. He looked like a little boy trying to defend Jokic because Jokic could just literally back into him and there's nothing he could do
Yeah,
about it.
what are you gonna
And he
do?
couldn't go up and block. So it was I think the matchup with the problem with the matchup with Dallas is going to be that like they don't need these giant bigs. They need some
Yeah,
speed and they need some pace and they need to be able to some mobility, and so I think they're
Yeah.
gonna have to either play Cat or Rudy, and then have to kind of figure things out. Mike Conley also looked great last. It was so it's gonna be a good series. I'm excited about that one, and then I think they're just kind of marching towards. I hate to say it because I don't like it, but I think they're marching towards. Both teams are marching towards a 5 or 6 game loss to the Celtics. So.
Well, I don't want to count my chickens because for the last decade they've looked like a team that could win the
Well,
finals,
all
and
I
they
want to do is set up the
haven't done it.
expectation that anything less than a Celtics win in 5 is a failure, so that when they lose to the
I see what's
Pacers,
happening here.
I can
I
come
see
back
what's
in
happening.
2 weeks and be like, "Can
See,
you believe the
you
biggest
want me to
letdown?"
be disappointed, and I'm trying not to be disappointed. I see what you're doing. Oh, bro,
Uh,
I mean, both of us have been super sick, so thanks for
yeah,
jumping on today, man.
if
I'm
you can't tell by the nasally voice with congestion, it's
Oh
it's
man.
it's been it's been making the rounds in the Turcato household. So
Yeah, the flu has hit hard around here.
yeah,
Well, let's jump in to our
yeah.
topic today. Great Scott, it's time for this week's topic, which is dun, 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 dun,
In my text messages from you, evangelism.
evangelism. Which you know, I think it freaks a lot of especially church planners out because a lot of them get into it to be preachers, not to be evangelists. Like they want people to come to faith, but they want it to be like through other people.
Mm.
And they're hoping that the people around them will invite other people to hear them preach on Sundays. That's kind of like their
I think that that's not just preachers that feel that way about evangelism. I think that a lot of Christians just generally would say, I want other people to come to faith, but I want other people to tell people about Jesus.
to do the
And then I'll
work.
be
Yeah, yeah.
around to, greet them.
Yeah, I will be a welcoming face when they come to the place where I feel comfortable, which is
That's right.
church. Well, and I think like what we just joked about it, but that is the fundamental hurdle for most
Hmm.
people
Yeah.
is that sharing their faith feels socially and culturally just out of step, like with the experiences of people, primarily because you're not allowed to disagree with anybody anymore, and you're not allowed to greet people that you don't know. Like in our culture, it's kind of like this. You have to have a warm entrance into anybody's life, and we
Yeah.
don't, we don't talk to people as much like in public spaces. Boise's like nice, but it's like not not
A lot nicer
warm.
than other places.
It is nicer in other places.
When I lived
I
in Portland, it was like you do not talk to a stranger. And that's not a
Yeah,
safety thing. That's a societal norm.
it's culture. Yeah, yeah. And when I came back from Boston, the lady at the Albertsons, I was just picking up some stuff for a barbecue, and she's like, "Hey, how's it going? Do you have any plans
Yeah.
this weekend?" And I was like,
Yeah.
"Whoa, listen, lady, you don't know me. Get out of my business." Which I don't think I would have done that in another place. So culture really sets that so much. But I think overall, like if you look at everywhere, there's just like a culture of you stay in your lane, I'll stay in my
Hmm.
lane, and there's no healthy like interaction of ideas or ideology. It's much more everything is polarized or we don't talk about things.
Yeah.
So like starting out is really tough. You and I have done a lot of evangelism because we were Campus Crusade guys.
Yep.
We were both on staff and interns with Crew, and we hung out with college students and high school students, and we taught them how to share their faith. So I want you to go back to that freshman, sophomore in college, and someone said, "Hey, Matt, we're going to go out and we're going to share our faith today." What was that very first experience like for you?
Very early on, it was I think it was I was very comfortable observing it, but I didn't feel very comfortable like leading the conversations. I think part of that was a lack of I mean, just I was new in my faith. I mean, I was involved in Crusade as a first in the first year of my walk with Christ. So there was this kind of aspect of like, oh, like someone's going to ask me something I don't know the answer to. So I think there's part of it was that, but I definitely felt like I had always heard kind of like the things you don't talk about or like religion and politics. And there's this aspect of like it kind of felt like it was a taboo subject, one, but also people don't want to talk about this. Like walking up to a stranger and asking them, hey, do you mind if I sit down and have a conversation with you or ask you some questions? And then when you start getting to spirituality, it felt like it was like, this is going to be like not oppressive, but this is going to be like me uh, causing a like a negative feeling for them. The thing I was
Mhm.
most interested in is like, especially on a college campus in the early 2000s to even 2008, 2009, like college students were very open to having spiritual conversations. So I
Oh
think
yeah.
my initial feeling was like, ugh, like there's this kind of pang in my chest of like, what are we doing? Why do we have to do this? I get like this is how spiritual multiplication happens. This is how people are going to come to hear about Jesus. But it felt weird, and I think the thing that made me more comfortable was like actually seeing the openness that, especially like I said,
Mhm.
my experience with college students or high school students later when I started doing student venture, how open they were to having a conversation or to hearing thoughts that were different than theirs. So
Yeah, well, I think you touched on something so important, which I've experienced time and time again, is that my thought is that no one wants to talk about spiritual life. They don't want to talk about religion, but actually they don't want to hear other people talk about it.
that's true.
They want to talk about it.
Yeah.
Like they because everybody sits around and has these ideas about the way that the universe works, and they have all these feelings and questions inside of them about existence and about relationship and about where they come from, where they're like they have all these feelings and ideas, and I think most people actually want to work those out in like safe places.
Yeah.
But most of the time, when people enter into spiritual conversations, it's either someone's trying to convince me to not believe, someone's
Hmm.
trying to convince me to believe, or I'm not going to talk about it. Like those are the only three kind of
Yeah.
spiritual conversations they have. Is none. You're trying to convince me, or I'm trying to convince you, and
Yeah.
all three of those feel like really threatening in our culture. But
Yeah.
what if like what we've discovered is that having conversations that start with people telling you their story
Hmm.
and walking through their spiritual ideas and what they think and believe, that actually creates tons of open opportunity to
Yeah.
share your life and your relationship with God.
Yeah.
Um,
I would like kind of dovetailing on that. Some of the most, not just most successful out in terms of like seeing fruit from it, but some of the best experiences I had in college sharing my faith was through like focus groups that we would host, where it's like, hey, we lived in the dorms, come have pizza. We're just going to ask questions. We're not going to share anything. And it created this environment where you had people in the room who you weren't, it's not a gospel presentation. It's just me asking a question to a wide variety of people about what do you believe, having a bunch of cross conversation, and then being able to say at the end of it, hey, if you are interested in hearing more about what I believe, or if you've got some questions, like I'd love to keep chatting. And oh, my pup's going crazy. So if you, anyway, those were the most fun for me because I think outside of just like the hurdle of like walking up to a stranger in the sub and saying, "Hey, can I sit down and ask you a couple questions?" It did feel like we were just creating the safe space for a dialogue to happen. And I think, like you
mhm.
said, when people have an opportunity to share with you what their thoughts are, it's a lot. They're a lot more engaged and a lot more willing to kind of share than they are if you kind of walk up and say, "Hey, can I tell you about Jesus?"
Yeah.
Which is
Well, let's jump
yeah.
back to 2005, 2006 when you
Hmm.
were I think you were a sophomore, you went back into the dorms, living with your
Yeah.
buddies. You're putting on these groups. Walk through kind of the process of how you invited people, what you did when you were there, and then what happened afterwards because I think it's just such a great story.
Yeah, you talking about like the whole like the whole dorm experience, or
Well, I
just
mean the
specifically like these
focus
groups?
groups. Yeah,
Yeah,
yeah, yeah, yeah.
absolutely. Yeah, so me and one of my roommates who's also involved with crew kind of moved into the dorms with the intention of like, hey, we wanna see, you know, some fruit in Chaffee Hall, which was some might say
Yeah.
the most unreached areas of
The,
Boise
the
State.
the worst place to live
That's
in the
right.
world.
It's like and so part of that
Well,
was,
and part of that story is
okay.
Boise State. Nobody lived on campus at that point.
Yeah.
You're
Yeah.
talking like
They just built two brand new dorms that were like really more like suites of
yeah,
apartments. And so especially Chaffee was like you only lived there if you were a freshman, which was part of our strategic plan was like, hey, we want to reach freshmen. Or if you're an athlete and you lived in the D wing, because that's just where all the athletes lived.
yeah.
But yeah, so part of it was really nice because me and my roommate had moved in with the plan of like, hey, we want to build an environment where spiritual conversations are happening. But what we would do is we would go out and we'd go to Domino's or to Little Caesars and get like 6 pizzas. And we would we would go to each of the floors during like the some of our meetings and say, hey, we're going to be doing a focus group on Thursday night, and we're just going to be asking questions. We're not going to talk about anything, but we want to ask some questions. Let's hear kind of about people's spiritual background. So even then, we're bringing up like it's a spiritual conversation. And pizza's free. You can come. You can have a couple slices. All we do is just ask that you'd answer a couple questions while you're there. And we would continuously be surprised at seeing, 10, 15 people show up to these. And so once they'd show up, it would literally just kind of be me and this other guy facilitating a conversation. We had, a list of questions like, what do you believe is true? Do you have a spiritual background? Was that a positive, or did you have a spiritual background as a kid? Was that a positive or negative experience? Or what is your current spiritual background? Do you believe there's a God? And so again, we're just asking these questions, not with any intention of ever sharing what we think, and hearing all kinds of different people from all different walks of life start to engage in conversation, really with each other. And it's like one person says like, "Oh, this is what I believe," and then somebody would ask them a question, and we'd moderate it to make sure that it was a safe environment. But then, like I said, at the end, we would say, "Hey, thanks so much for coming. Grab some pizza on the way out. We're going to stick around for an extra half an hour. If you want to chat more about that, or if you want to hear anything about what we believe, because we really didn't want this to be a place where we kind of share what we thought, stick around." And normally we'd get 2 or 3 people who just kind of stick around just because they're kind of interested, or if something was working in their heart. But a lot of people would just be like, "What are you guys doing here? What's the point of this?" And it was really cool, because I think that it created a different perspective of kind of like a Christian spiritual conversation. A lot of, the ideas of missionaries, or what we think of like in the LDS or Jehovah's Witnesses, like people walking up saying like, "Hey, can I convince you of what I believe?" And this is people saying, "Hey, we'll sit here for an hour and we're not going to tell you anything about what we believe. And we don't want this to be a
Hmm.
place where we talk about what we believe. We want this just to be a conversation." And so then those people, especially the ones that stuck around at the end, were kind of like they the soil was fertile for them to kind of go like, "All right, what you guys are different. What's the deal with you guys?" So
Yeah, well, so
yeah.
let's deconstruct that, because I think what you just described, which I think is a very strong outreach and evangelism strategy, particularly like on a college campus. It was very useful, and I think they still do similar things at Boise
Hmm.
State 20 years later.
Yeah.
What I would say, like, you fundamentally believe that it was not about the information that you were trying to give them. It was about them and their
Yeah.
walk with God, and
Yeah.
God was doing some work inside of them. And what you were doing is you were kind of testing out to see, where is there some spiritual interest, where is there some seeds that have been planted, where is there some fertile ground, right? Is that how you describe it?
Yeah. Yeah. Absolutely. And I think that like where's the fertile ground, and like the it's kind of creating fertile ground, because a lot of college students are in college, and the thing that's the top of mind for them isn't what they believe.
Yeah.
And so rather than engaging them in a spiritual conversation that is like debate and like point counterpoint, here, let me tell you what I believe, you tell me what you believe, how can I win you over? It was more like kind of raising this idea to the top, where then it could kind of sit. And sometimes that wasn't going to be a conversation that happened the night of, but the nice part is usually we would do it in the dorms, because those people are seeing around the dorms pretty regularly. And so,
Yeah.
maybe it's a week later when somebody's like, I've been thinking about what, some of those questions that you asked last week. It's like, oh, cool. Now that has kind of come to be a conversation that wasn't necessarily there, that we wouldn't have had, and that you probably wouldn't have had with me if I'd walked up to you in the sub and said, "Hey, if you were to die tonight and stand before God, well, on a scale of 1 to 10, how sure are you go to heaven?" That's a very different approach, and we did that too. But I
Yeah.
think that in my experience, I felt more comfortable as a just natural kind of listener and somebody who wants to get to know people. And I felt like I was never like needing to like be on the defense or be on the offense. It was always
Yeah.
just, we're going to be in this room together. I'm
Well,
going to
and
pause this real
that's a
quick and let my
shift.
pup out while you talk.
Yeah, well, that's a shift from an antagonism kind of standpoint, where you're trying to win an argument or win someone over to faith. Instead of thinking that way, what you guys did was you said, the people are the battleground. I'm not actually in a battle with that person. And the job is not to convince them. The job is not to win them over, but your work is to. I think the fundamental belief you're showing is that if I get close to them and Jesus is in me, and they experience God in me, that's actually the beginning of their faith journey. A lot of times is
Yeah.
they experience God, and then they say, you know what, that makes a lot of sense,
Yeah.
rather than trying to convince their brain first and then get their heart to come along. Most of the time, people are going with their gut and their heart, some
Yeah.
sort of like reactionary. Well, I just don't like those people because they yell at me in the quad. Which we always had those people at a college campus yelling at us in the quad,
Yeah.
telling us who were believers that we weren't really believers because we weren't
Yeah.
fundamentalist Baptists or weirdo Pentecostal. Like there's
Yeah.
just people yelling at you constantly. And weirdly, nobody ever came to faith from the guys screaming in the quad
Yeah.
or even the guys debating in the quad. There was a lot, like when I first went to college, it was this guy, he was with another campus ministry, and he would just have open air debates on the quad during lunchtime. And there were some interesting things that happened and some interesting spaces, like argumentation that showed up. But
Hmm.
people they were in a posture of opposition rather than
Yeah.
a posture of learning together.
Yeah.
And what you did with the focus group is you said, I want to discover you. I want to learn about you. I want to see what is happening spiritually inside of you. Tell me your story. And all of a sudden, I'm going to drop my gate down and go, this guy cares about me and wants to know me. And no one
Yeah.
actually asked these questions.
Yeah.
And I think in general, most people really want to be asked in a place where they feel safe,
Hmm.
and they want to talk about it, but they never feel safe,
Yeah.
almost ever. And so
Yeah.
what you did there is so beautiful. And I think that actually is something you could do. We're in a different stage of life with little kids and
Yeah.
stuff.
I was gonna ask because like going into this conversation, knowing the topic was evangelism, my mindset goes to even as I've shared my past, my mindset goes to kind of like, okay, what does it look like to invite people to church, and how do we create spaces where people can feel that safe environment? But how does that applicably transfer? I know there's similar experiences, and we've hosted groups like that are more kind of seeker friendly or more exploratory. But for thinking for a church planter, like how do you create spaces like that without it just being like, my first thought is inviting somebody to church on Sunday is having them come and hear about Jesus.
Hmm.
And maybe they meet somebody in the lobby and maybe you get a chance to chat with them, maybe you take them out to lunch afterwards. But like for the most part, you're inviting them to a 45-minute, maybe 50 or 55 if it's a bad,
When Kyle preaches,
when Kyle
not me.
preaches. Yeah. But so what do those spaces look like? I mean, part of it might be the answer might be groups like that. Like
Mhm.
what's the name of the group that you guys did?
Oh, Alpha.
Um Alpha, like an alpha group or something like
Yeah,
that.
yeah, yeah.
But what are the other spaces that you can create for evangelism that like is more seeker centric and more like I don't want to say palatable to like your typical Christian, but for the
Yeah.
most part, again,
Something
like
that
I'm
they could
definitely not
do.
going to the
Yeah, yeah.
mall and just sitting down with people and say, can we
Mhm.
have a spiritual conversation? So like, what does the
Yeah, yeah.
atmosphere and the avenue for evangelism look like in a church plant for your average 35-year-old?
Yeah, well, I mean, I think we have more to talk about. We probably need to do like a 3 or 4 part series on this, and
Yeah.
we probably end up will because there's so much to talk about. One thing that I think you brought up there is that there aren't we don't have people that we're in conversation with is probably the biggest issue at 35. And so what I'd say is that what we should be looking at is asking the question, how can I go from like there's these shifts from no conversation to having a conversation. That's a big jump in our world today. And I think that one of the easiest ways to do that is to have a meal together. So if it's a work colleague, have a meal instead of coffee or have a luxuriously long coffee. Order a pastry so that people sit for a little while and like sit and have a real conversation. And then going from, I think, like any conversation into a meaningful conversation where you're not just talking about work and strategy and you're not just talking about hobbies, but you ask people questions about their family and where they're from. Like, I think those are some deep questions that actually open up avenues for you to kind of explore and see what's happening under the surface. So, no conversation to a conversation, to go from a conversation to a meaningful conversation, and then to go from a meaningful conversation to a spiritual conversation honestly, that's actually easier than people realize once you're kind of down that path. All it takes is, did you grow up with like a spiritual or religious background? How was it? Like just something like that. People will tell you because it feels distant because of something that happened to them when they were a kid,
Yeah.
right? It's like my parents did this to me, and they can share kind of their experience with it. And then you can ask, well, was that something you enjoyed? Is that something that's still a part of your life, or is that something you left behind? And you ask these neutral questions that let people go, oh, I can actually be myself here. And they share a little bit more of your story. And then like the next stage is to ask them, like, what does it look like for you to grow in that aspect of your life now as a 35-year-old? Like what sort of things do you do with your practices or your like daily rhythm to like either grow or to explore that spiritual space? And people will have ideas or they won't have ideas, and then they'll say, well, why do you ask about all that stuff? And then you could say something like, I'm just really interested in it. It's such a powerful part of my life that I always want to know where people are at and what they're thinking. And then they'll ask you a bunch of questions about you, and don't make it about trying to convince them. This is about relationship. And one of the fundamental beliefs that you have to shift is it's not a transaction that's trying to get content into them and a decision out of them. The work that you're trying to do is build a long-term friendship so that the gospel can come to life. And so relationship becomes like the outcome that we're looking for rather than the decision. So we have way more to talk about, man. We got to make some notes, and we'll jump into it again. Any last thoughts before we head out today?
No, it was good. It was like I said, I think I admitted I had an avenue where I thought this would go, but I'm more excited and more intrigued about where it did go. So I'm excited to keep the conversation going next time.
Yeah, and I think that the thing I really want to get across is when you think like a missionary, you stop asking the question, how do I get people to church? And how do I get people into the building? And you start asking, how can I go where they're at and do the things it's going to take to help them connect with God? And so what I want to say to all the church planners out there is if you want to create a culture of evangelism, you've got to go first. You've got to be able to share stories about sharing your faith. You've got to bring people along with you. They have to see it alive in you. And one of my favorite passages in the Bible is Paul tells Timothy, do the work of an evangelist. He doesn't tell Timothy, hey, you're gifted as an evangelist, get out there. He says, go do the work of an evangelist. And I think that he's saying that because that's all of our job, is to proclaim the good news of Jesus and to see where there's spiritual opportunity for the kingdom of God to transform people's lives. So thanks for being here today. You want to do the ending? Matt, you ready?
No, you're going to do it because my brain fog is.
That's right, brain fog. Hey, remember, church planner, if you want to reach the people no one else is reaching, you've got to go where no one else is going and do what no one else is willing to do. See you next time.